The city of Chicago was alive with noise and movement. Cars honked their horns on busy streets, people hurried to work or school, and the air carried the faint smell of coffee and exhaust fumes. It was a place where dreams were chased and struggles were real. For Marcus Johnson, it was just another day in the life of an ordinary man trying to make ends meet. Or so everyone thought. Marcus had lived in Chicago for most of his life. He wasn't flashy or loud. He kept to himself and focused on his work. To the outside world, he was nothing more than a mechanic who fixed cars at a small garage downtown. But what nobody knew, not even his closest friends, was that Marcus wasn't just a mechanic. Beneath his quiet exterior lay a secret life. He guarded fiercely. Marcus was a highly trained CIA operative working undercover to bring down one of the largest human trafficking rings in the country. For months, Marcus had been collecting information about this dangerous organization. The traffickers operated under the radar, using fake businesses and corrupt connections to smuggle people into the United States. They exploited vulnerable individuals, forcing them into labor or worse. Marcus's mission was clear: to gather enough evidence to dismantle the operation and put its leaders behind bars. But as always with such missions, things weren't going smoothly. On a chilly morning in early March, Marcus left his apartment wearing a simple jacket and jeans. He carried no weapons, only a phone loaded with encrypted messages from his handler. His plan for the day was straightforward: meet with Angela Ruiz, a key informant who had promised him critical details about the ring's leadership structure. Angela had already provided valuable intel, but this meeting would be different. She claimed she had documents, hard proof, that could finally crack the case wide open. As Marcus drove through the city, he noticed two police cruisers parked near the corner of 5th Street. Their flashing lights reflected off nearby buildings, casting eerie shadows across the sidewalk. Two officers stood beside a car they'd pulled over, a beat-up sedan with a broken tail light. One of the officers, Brian Keller, leaned against the driver's door while the other, Robert Hayes, circled the vehicle like a predator stalking its prey. Marcus slowed down slightly, curious but cautious. He didn't recognize the driver being questioned, but something about the scene made him uneasy. Both Keller and Hayes had reputations around town. They were known for targeting minorities during traffic stops, often accusing them of crimes without evidence. Rumors swirled that they used excessive force and fabricated stories to justify arrests. Still, Marcus told himself not to get involved. His job was to stay invisible, to blend in and avoid drawing attention. So he kept driving, turning onto a side street that led toward his meeting with Angela. But fate had other plans. A few blocks away, Marcus saw flashing blue lights in his rearview mirror. Confused, he glanced at the speedometer. He wasn't speeding. His registration was up to date. Everything seemed fine. Yet when he pulled over and rolled down his window, Officer Keller approached him with a scowl on his face. "License and registration," Keller barked, his tone sharp and accusatory. Marcus complied, handing over the requested documents. As Keller examined them, Hayes appeared beside the car, peering inside as if searching for something illegal. Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Something about their behavior felt off. "Where you headed?" Keller asked, tossing the papers onto the hood of the car. "To see a friend," Marcus replied calmly, careful not to give away too much. Hayes smirked. "What kind of friend?" "That's none of your business," Marcus said, his voice firm but polite. He knew better than to escalate the situation. These men thrived on intimidation, and showing fear or anger would only play into their hands. Keller narrowed his eyes. "You got a smart mouth, huh? Maybe we should search your car, see what you're hiding." "I haven't done anything wrong," Marcus said evenly. "There's no reason to search my car," but Hayes ignored him, opening the passenger side door and leaning in. Marcus clenched his fists, resisting the urge to intervene. If these officers found anything suspicious, even something planted, they could ruin everything. His cover, his mission, his entire identity depended on staying calm. "What's this?" Hayes suddenly exclaimed, holding up a small bag of white powder. Cocaine, or at least it looked like cocaine. Marcus stared at it, stunned. He hadn't seen that bag before. It hadn't been in his car earlier that morning. "You're under arrest," Keller announced, yanking Marcus out of the vehicle. "Resisting arrest will only make things worse." "I'm not resisting," Marcus protested, but it was useless. Within minutes, he was handcuffed and shoved into the back of a police cruiser. As they drove away, Marcus's mind raced. Who had set him up? Was it connected to the trafficking ring? Or was this just another example of Keller and Hayes abusing their power? Back at the station, Marcus sat silently in an interrogation room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the walls. He refused to answer questions, knowing that saying too much could blow his cover. Instead, he waited, trusting that his handler would find out what happened and step in if necessary. Outside the station, news of Marcus's arrest spread quickly. Protesters gathered holding signs that read, "Justice for all" and "End police brutality." Among them was Lisa Carter, a young lawyer known for taking on difficult cases involving civil rights violations. When she heard about Marcus's situation, she decided to offer her services pro bono. Something about the story didn't sit right with her. Why would a mechanic with no criminal record suddenly be accused of assaulting two officers? When Lisa met Marcus for the first time, she was struck by how composed he seemed despite the circumstances. Most people in his position would have been angry or scared, but Marcus exuded a quiet confidence that intrigued her. "I can help you," Lisa said firmly, "but I need to know everything. No secrets." Marcus hesitated. He wanted to trust her. He needed someone on his side. But revealing the truth about his double life was out of the question. For now, all he could do was nod and hope she believed him when he said, "I didn't do what they're accusing me of." Little did either of them know, this was just the beginning of a fight that would expose shocking truths, challenge the system, and change lives forever. Lisa Carter sat in her small office staring at the stack of papers on her desk. The case of Marcus Johnson weighed heavily on her mind. Something about it didn't add up. She had spent hours reviewing the police report, and every time she read it, she found new inconsistencies. The officers' statements were too polished, too rehearsed. It was as if they had planned their story beforehand, which made Lisa suspicious. She decided to dig deeper. Her first step was to look into the backgrounds of officers Brian Keller and Robert Hayes. What she uncovered was troubling. Over the past 5 years, both men had been involved in numerous controversial arrests, most of them targeting Black and Latino individuals. Many of these cases had been dismissed due to lack of evidence, but no formal complaints had ever stuck against the officers. They seemed untouchable, protected by a system that turned a blind eye to their misconduct. Lisa also reached out to community members who had interacted with Keller and Hayes in the past. She spoke with shopkeepers, residents, and even former suspects who claimed they had been unfairly targeted by the two officers. One man, a middle-aged father named Jamal, described how he had been stopped multiple times for minor infractions, only to be let go without so much as a ticket. Another woman, Maria Lopez, recounted how Hayes had searched her car without permission during a routine traffic stop, claiming he suspected drugs, though nothing illegal was found. Each conversation painted a clearer picture. Keller and Hayes weren't just bad cops. They were predators preying on vulnerable people. But while Lisa's findings strengthened her resolve to fight for Marcus, she still lacked concrete evidence that could prove his innocence in court. Without hard proof, all she had were suspicions, and suspicions weren't enough to win a case. Meanwhile, Marcus remained locked in a holding cell at the station. He knew better than to panic. Panic led to mistakes, and mistakes could cost lives, not just his own, but those of the people depending on him. His thoughts drifted to Angela Ruiz, the informant he was supposed to meet that day. Had she been caught? Was she safe? Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone terribly wrong. As the hours dragged on, Marcus received a visit from his CIA handler, a man named David Ross. David arrived disguised as a public defender carrying a briefcase filled with encrypted devices and burner phones. He slipped into the interrogation room unnoticed, closing the door behind him. "We need to talk," David said quietly, sitting across from Marcus. "What happened out there?" Marcus explained everything. The fake cocaine planted in his car, The aggressive behavior of the officers, the lack of any real reason for his arrest. David listened intently, his expression growing darker with each detail. "This is bigger than we thought," David muttered. "Keller and Hayes aren't just dirty cops. They're connected to the trafficking ring you've been investigating." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. If what David said was true, then his cover wasn't blown because of incompetence or bad luck. It was deliberate. Someone within the ring must have discovered his identity and tipped off the officers. That meant the entire operation was compromised. "Do you trust your lawyer?" David asked suddenly. Marcus hesitated. "I don't know her well, but she seems determined to help." "Why?" David leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You might not have a choice but to bring her in on this, at least partially. We can't risk losing momentum on the mission, and right now, she's your best shot at staying out of prison." Marcus nodded slowly. He didn't like the idea of involving someone outside the agency, but he understood the necessity. If Lisa could find a way to expose Keller and Hayes, it might open the door to uncovering the larger conspiracy. Back at her office, Lisa continued her investigation. Late one evening, after everyone else had gone home, she stumbled upon a lead that gave her hope. A convenience store owner named Mr. Patel contacted her, saying he had surveillance footage from the day of Marcus's arrest. Apparently, his store's cameras captured part of the incident near 5th Street. Excited, Lisa rushed to the store early the next morning. Mr. Patel greeted her warmly and led her to a back room where a dusty computer monitor displayed grainy, black and white images. Together, they scrolled through hours of footage until they found what they were looking for. The video showed Marcus pulling over calmly when the police cruisers appeared behind him. There was no sign of resistance, no aggressive behavior. In fact, Marcus seemed cooperative throughout the interaction, keeping his hands visible and speaking politely. Then, toward the end of the recording, Officer Hayes could be seen leaning into Marcus's car before emerging with the bag of white powder. The angle wasn't perfect, but it was enough to cast doubt on the officer's version of events. Lisa thanked Mr. Patel profusely and left the store clutching a flash drive containing the footage. This was the break she needed, a tangible piece of evidence that contradicted the official narrative. But as she walked back to her car, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Glancing around nervously, she spotted a dark sedan parked across the street. Its windows were tinted, making it impossible to see inside. Shaking off her unease, Lisa climbed into her car and drove away quickly. Later that night, Marcus received another message from David. This time it contained instructions for a risky plan. Using skills honed during his training, Marcus would secretly gather more evidence against Keller and Hayes. His goal was to infiltrate their precinct and plant listening devices in areas where sensitive conversations might take place. It was dangerous work, but Marcus knew it had to be done. Every second counted. Under the cover of darkness, Marcus sneaked into the precinct using a maintenance entrance he'd identified earlier. Moving silently through the dimly lit hallways, he avoided security cameras and stayed alert for any signs of movement. Finally, he reached the locker room where Keller and Hayes often hung out between shifts. Carefully, he attached tiny bugs to the lockers and walls, ensuring they blended seamlessly with the surroundings. Just as Marcus finished, he heard footsteps approaching. Heart pounding, he ducked behind a row of lockers and held his breath. 2 officers entered the room, laughing and joking about their latest bust. As they changed into civilian clothes, Marcus strained to listen. "You hear about that mechanic we picked up?" one of them asked casually. "Yeah," the other replied. "Guy didn't put up much of a fight. Should have seen the look on his face when we pulled out the coke." They chuckled, clearly amused by their own cleverness. But then the conversation took a darker turn. "He's probably going to lawyer up," one officer said. "We should have roughed him up a bit more." "Nah, leave it alone," the other responded. "The boss wants this one handled quietly. Too many eyes on us already." The mention of the boss sent a jolt through Marcus. These men weren't acting alone. They were following orders. Orders that likely came from someone high up in the trafficking ring. Clutching this vital information, Marcus waited until the coast was clear before slipping out of the building undetected. When he returned to his holding cell, Marcus replayed the conversation in his mind. The pieces were starting to come together, but he still needed more. With Lisa working tirelessly to build a defense and David coordinating support from the agency, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time since his arrest, he believed there might actually be a way out. But as dawn broke over the city, Marcus reminded himself not to get ahead of himself. The truth was explosive, yes, but revealing it would require precision, timing, and an unshakable belief in justice. And Marcus knew better than anyone that justice rarely came easy. The days leading up to the trial were tense. Lisa Carter spent every waking moment preparing for what would be the most challenging case of her career. She reviewed the surveillance footage from Mr. Patel's convenience store over and over, looking for any detail she might have missed. The grainy video wasn't perfect. It didn't show Officer Hayes planting the bag of white powder in Marcus's car, but it was enough to cast doubt on the officer's story. Lisa knew that in court, even a small crack in their narrative could make all the difference. At the same time, Lisa worked tirelessly to gather more evidence. She reached out to other lawyers, activists, and community leaders who had dealt with Keller and Hayes in the past. Each person she spoke with painted a similar picture. These officers had a history of targeting minorities and fabricating charges to cover their tracks. One lawyer shared documents from a previous case where Keller had been accused of planting evidence but walked away unscathed because no one dared testify against him. Another activist described how Hayes routinely harassed local business owners, demanding bribes in exchange for leniency during inspections. Lisa compiled all this information into a file she hoped would expose the officer's pattern of misconduct. But as thorough as her research was, she couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play. Why would two corrupt cops go through so much trouble to frame Marcus? What made him such a threat to them? These questions gnawed at her, but Marcus remained tight-lipped about his background. All he would say was that he trusted her to do her job, and that trust weighed heavily on Lisa's shoulders. Meanwhile, Marcus sat in his cell, replaying the conversation he'd overheard. In the precinct locker room, the mention of the boss confirmed his worst fears. Keller and Hayes weren't just rogue officers, they were pawns in a much larger game. Someone powerful was pulling their strings, someone connected to the human trafficking ring Marcus had been investigating. This revelation filled him with both anger and determination. If he could expose the officer's corruption, he might also uncover the identity of the mastermind behind the operation. David Ross stayed in constant contact with Marcus, updating him on the agency's progress. They had traced some of the money, trails linked to Keller and Hayes, discovering suspicious deposits in offshore accounts. It seemed clear now that the officers were being paid to eliminate anyone who got too close to the truth. But proving this connection required more than circumstantial evidence. David urged Marcus to hold steady and not reveal his true identity until absolutely necessary. Timing, he reminded Marcus, was everything. As the trial date approached, Lisa met with Marcus again. She laid out her strategy, explaining how she planned to use the surveillance footage and testimonies from community members to challenge the officer's credibility. Marcus listened carefully, nodding along as she spoke. When she finished, he hesitated for a moment before speaking. "There's more to this than you know," he said finally, "but I can't tell you everything yet. Just trust me when I say the stakes are higher than they seem." Lisa frowned, frustrated by his vagueness. "Marcus, if there's something you're not telling me, it could hurt your case. You need to let me help you fully." "I will," Marcus promised, "when the time is right." Despite her frustration, Lisa respected his decision. She sensed that whatever secret Marcus was keeping was tied to his safety, and perhaps the safety of others. For now, she focused on what she could control, dismantling the false narrative spun by Keller and Hayes. On the morning of the trial, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Reporters packed the benches, eager to document the highly publicized case. Outside, protesters held signs demanding justice for Marcus Johnson, chanting slogans like "No more lies" and "Protect our people." The atmosphere was electric, charged with emotion and expectation. Inside, Lisa stood beside Marcus as they waited for the proceedings to begin. She glanced at him, noting the calm determination etched on his face. Despite everything he had endured, Marcus carried himself with quiet strength. Lisa felt a surge of admiration for him, though she still wished he would confide in her completely. When the judge entered the room and called the court to order, the tension reached a fever pitch. The prosecution went first, presenting its case against Marcus. Keller and Hayes took the stand, recounting their version of events with practiced ease. According to them, Marcus had been aggressive and uncooperative, forcing them to act in self-defense. They claimed the bag of white powder found in his car proved his involvement in illegal activity. Their testimony was smooth, almost rehearsed, and designed to paint Marcus as a dangerous criminal. But Lisa was ready. When it was her turn to cross-examine the officers, she pounced. Using the surveillance footage, she highlighted discrepancies in their story, pointing out moments where Marcus appeared calm and compliant despite their claims of resistance. She also introduced witness statements from community members who described similar experiences with Keller and Hayes, suggesting a pattern of misconduct. "Officer Keller," Lisa began, her voice steady but sharp. "You stated under oath that my client resisted arrest, yet this video shows him cooperating fully. Can you explain the discrepancy?" Keller shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "The video doesn't show everything. Sometimes actions aren't visible from certain angles." "And what about the bag of white powder?" Lisa pressed. "You claim it belonged to my client. Did you personally see him place it in his car?" Hayes jumped in, trying to deflect attention. "It was found during a lawful search of the vehicle. That's all that matters." Lisa smiled faintly, sensing cracks forming in their facade. "A lawful search or a planted item? Isn't it true that neither of you has ever been held accountable for questionable arrests in the past?" The courtroom erupted in murmurs as Keller and Hayes exchanged uneasy glances. The prosecutor objected, but the damage was done. Lisa had succeeded in sowing seeds of doubt in the minds of the jury. Just as it seemed the tide was turning, Marcus leaned over and whispered something to Lisa. His expression was serious, almost urgent. After a brief hesitation, Lisa nodded and rose to address the judge. "Your Honor," she said, her voice firm, "I have additional evidence that directly implicates Officers Keller and Hayes in illegal activities beyond this case. With your permission, I'd like to present it now." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Proceed." Lisa turned to Marcus, who gave a subtle nod. Taking a deep breath, she played the audio recordings Marcus had secretly obtained from the precinct locker room. The voices of Keller and Hayes filled the courtroom, discussing the fabricated arrest and referring to the boss, who wanted the matter handled quietly. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the implications sank in. The prosecutor scrambled to object, but the judge silenced him with a wave of her hand. "This court will hear the entirety of the recording," she declared. By the time the audio ended, the room was silent except for the hum of reporters furiously typing notes. Keller and Hayes looked pale, their confident demeanor shattered. Lisa turned to the jury, her eyes blazing with conviction. "Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't just about one man's wrongful arrest. It's about a system that allows corrupt individuals to abuse their power without consequence. Today, we have the chance to change that." As the judge called for a recess to consider the new evidence, Marcus exhaled deeply. He knew revealing. The recordings came with risks. His cover was blown and his mission was compromised. But he also knew it was the only way to ensure justice. Outside the courtroom, chaos erupted as news of the explosive revelations spread. Protesters cheered, while others demanded immediate action against Keller and Hayes. For Lisa, the moment was bittersweet. She had fought hard to expose the truth, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus's story was far from over. As she glanced at him, she saw a flicker of relief in his eyes, but also a hint of sadness. Whatever secrets he still held, Lisa realized, would likely remain buried for now, and though she didn't fully understand why, she trusted that Marcus had his reasons. As the day drew to a close, Marcus stepped outside the courthouse, momentarily blinded by the flashing cameras and shouted questions from reporters. For the First time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. The fight wasn't over, but the truth had finally begun to shine a light on the darkness. The courtroom was a storm of chaos after the audio recording played. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, cameras flashed, and whispers filled the air as people tried to process what they had just heard. The judge called for order repeatedly, banging her gavel until the noise subsided. But even then, the tension in the room remained palpable. Keller and Hayes sat stiffly at the prosecution's table, their faces pale and their eyes darting around, nervously. They knew they were in trouble. The recording had exposed their lies, leaving them vulnerable in a way they hadn't anticipated. For years, they had operated with impunity, knowing that no one would dare challenge them. Now their arrogance had been laid bare for everyone to see. Lisa Carter stood confidently beside Marcus, her heart racing but her expression calm. She had spent countless hours preparing for this moment, and now it felt surreal to watch the pieces fall into place. The evidence she had gathered, combined with Marcus's secret recordings, was enough to dismantle the officer's fabricated story. But Lisa wasn't naive. She knew that exposing Keller and Hayes was only the beginning. There was still much work to be done before justice could truly be served. The judge announced a recess to allow both sides time to regroup. As the courtroom emptied, Lisa turned to Marcus, concern etched on her face. "Are you okay?" she asked, softly. "This changes everything." Marcus nodded, though his jaw was tight. He had known this day would come eventually, but he hadn't expected it to happen so soon. His cover was blown, which meant his mission to take down the human trafficking ring was now in jeopardy. Still, he couldn't regret his decision. If revealing the truth could stop Keller and Hayes, and maybe even lead to uncovering the mastermind behind the operation, it was worth the risk. "I'll be fine," Marcus said finally. "Just keep doing what you're doing. We've got them on the ropes." Lisa nodded, determination flashing in her eyes. She didn't fully understand Marcus's role in all of this, but she trusted him. Whatever secrets he was keeping, she believed they were important, and that they wouldn't get in the way of achieving justice. Outside the courthouse, protests grew louder as news of the recording spread. Protesters chanted slogans like, "No more lies" and "Hold them accountable," their voices echoing through the streets. Many held signs bearing Marcus's name, celebrating him as a symbol of resistance against systemic injustice. Others demanded broader reforms within the police department, calling for an end to corruption and abuse of power. Inside the precinct, panic set in among Keller and Hayes' colleagues. Some officers feared being implicated in the scandal, while others worried about the scrutiny the department would face. A few brave souls began speaking out, sharing stories of how Keller and Hayes had bullied or coerced them into silence over the years. These confessions added fuel to the fire, further tarnishing the officers' reputations. Meanwhile, the media frenzy reached a fever pitch. News outlets across the country picked up the story, framing it as a turning point in the fight against police misconduct. Social media exploded with hashtags supporting Marcus and condemning Keller and Hayes. Within hours, the case became national news, sparking debates about race, accountability, and the need for systemic change. Back at the courthouse, the trial resumed after the recess. The judge listened carefully as Lisa presented her arguments, emphasizing the pattern of misconduct exhibited by Keller and Hayes. She pointed out that their actions weren't isolated incidents, but part of a larger culture of corruption within the department. The surveillance footage, witness testimonies, and audio recordings all supported her claims, painting a damning picture of the two officers. The prosecutor struggled to counter Lisa's arguments, resorting to weak attempts to discredit the evidence. He questioned the authenticity of the audio recordings, suggesting they might have been tampered with. But Lisa was prepared. She called in a forensic expert who confirmed that the recordings were genuine and untampered. The prosecutor's objections crumbled under the weight of undeniable proof. As the day wore on, the tide continued to turn in Marcus's favor. The jury listened intently, their expressions growing increasingly sympathetic toward the defendant. It was clear that Lisa's strategy was working. By exposing Keller and Hayes' lies, she had shifted the narrative entirely, forcing the court to confront uncomfortable truths about bias and abuse of power. But just when it seemed like victory was within reach, an unexpected twist threw everything into uncertainty. During a break in the proceedings, Marcus received a message from David, Ross, his CIA handler. The agency had uncovered disturbing information. Angela Ruiz, Marcus's key informant, had been found dead earlier that morning. Her body had been dumped in an alley, riddled with bullet wounds. The news hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. Angela had risked everything to help him, and now she was gone, silenced forever. David urged Marcus to stay focused. "We can't let this derail us," he said firmly. "Angela gave her life for this mission. The best way to honor her is to finish what she started." Marcus clenched his fists, anger boiling beneath the surface. He wanted nothing more than to hunt down those responsible for Angela's death, but he knew he couldn't act impulsively. For now, his priority had to be staying alive and ensuring the trial reached its conclusion. Only then could he focus on dismantling the trafficking ring once and for all. When the trial reconvened, Lisa delivered her closing statement with passion and conviction. She reminded the jury of the evidence they had seen and the patterns of behavior exhibited by Keller and Hayes. She urged them not to look away from the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. "This isn't just about one man's wrongful arrest," Lisa said, her voice ringing through the courtroom. "It's about holding power accountable. It's about saying no to corruption and yes to justice. Today, you have the chance to make a difference, to send a message that no one is above the law." Her words resonated deeply, not just with the jury, but with everyone in the room. Even some of the reporters stopped typing mid-sentence, captivated by her eloquence and sincerity. After Lisa finished, the prosecutor made his final attempt to sway the jury, but his arguments felt hollow compared to Lisa's impassioned plea. When the judge instructed the jury to deliberate, it was clear that the verdict hinged on whether they believed Keller and Hayes' version of events or the overwhelming evidence presented by Lisa. Hours passed as the jury debated behind closed doors. Outside the courthouse, crowds waited anxiously for the outcome. Protesters lit candles in memory of Angela Ruiz, vowing to continue fighting for justice in her name. Inside the courtroom, Marcus sat quietly, his mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. No matter the verdict, he knew his life would never be the same. Finally, the jury returned with their decision. The foreperson stood, clutching a slip of paper, and read aloud the verdict. "Not guilty." A wave of relief washed over Marcus as the courtroom erupted in cheers. Lisa hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. For the first time in weeks, Marcus allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. Justice had been served, at least partially. But as the celebrations unfolded, Marcus couldn't forget the cost of this victory. Angela's death weighed heavily on his conscience, reminding him that the fight was far from over. Keller and Hayes may have been exposed, but the mastermind behind the trafficking ring remained at large. And now, with his cover blown, Marcus faced an uncertain future. Despite these challenges, Marcus resolved to press on. With Lisa by his side and the CIA backing him, he vowed to honor Angela's sacrifice by finishing the mission she had helped start. Justice might be slow, but Marcus believed it was worth fighting for, one step at a time. The verdict echoed through the courtroom like a thunderclap. Not guilty. For Marcus Johnson, it was both a relief and a bittersweet moment. The weight of weeks spent behind bars finally lifted, but the cost of his freedom weighed heavily on him. Angela Ruiz's death lingered in his mind, a constant reminder of the stakes of his mission. Her sacrifice wasn't something he could easily move past or forget. Outside the courthouse, chaos erupted as reporters shouted questions and protesters cheered wildly. Protest signs waved in the air, bearing messages like, "Justice prevails," and "No more corruption." Marcus stood silently beside Lisa Carter, his lawyer, as flashes from cameras blinded him momentarily. He felt out of place amidst the celebration, knowing that the victory was only partial. Yes, Keller and Hayes had been exposed for their lies, but the larger conspiracy they were tied to still loomed over him like a shadow. Lisa noticed Marcus's quiet demeanor and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You did it," she said softly, her voice cutting through the noise around them. "This is a win, for you, for Angela, and for everyone who's ever been wronged by people like them." Marcus nodded, though his expression remained somber. "It's not over yet," he replied. "Keller and Hayes are just pawns. The real fight is still ahead." Lisa didn't press him further. She had come to understand that Marcus carried secrets far beyond what she could grasp. Though she wanted to know more about his connection to the human trafficking ring and why officers like Keller and Hayes would go to such lengths to frame him, she respected his silence. Whatever Marcus was hiding, it was clear that it went deeper than a single case of police misconduct. Meanwhile, inside the precinct, panic spread among Keller and Hayes' colleagues. The two officers themselves were escorted out of the courthouse in handcuffs, their faces pale and their reputations shattered. They had been arrested on charges of corruption, falsifying evidence, and conspiracy. As news of their downfall spread, whispers filled the halls of the police department. Some officers feared being implicated in the scandal, while others quietly celebrated the exposure of long-standing abuses. The fallout extended beyond Chicago. The case sparked national outrage, with calls for reforms in law enforcement growing louder. Politicians scrambled to address the issue, promising investigations into systemic corruption and racial bias within police departments across the country. Activists seized the moment, organizing rallies and demanding accountability at every level. For many, Marcus's exoneration became a symbol of hope, a rare instance where justice seemed to triumph over power. But beneath the surface, darker forces stirred. The mastermind behind the human trafficking ring had taken notice of Marcus's actions. This individual, known only as the boss, operated from the shadows, pulling strings and ensuring that anyone who threatened the operation disappeared. Angela's murder had been a warning shot, and now that Marcus's cover was blown, he became an even bigger target. David Ross, Marcus's CIA handler, contacted him later that evening. "We're pulling you out temporarily," David said bluntly, "over a secure line. You're too exposed right now. If the boss figures out who you really are, you're dead." Marcus frowned, pacing back and forth in the small motel room he'd been assigned for safety. "I can't leave yet," he argued. "Angela gave her life to help me get this far. I owe it to her to finish what we started." "And you will," David countered. "But not if you're dead. Lay low for a few days while we regroup. We'll use this momentum to dig deeper into the trafficking ring. Trust me, we're closer than ever." Reluctantly, Marcus agreed. He knew David was right. Staying alive was crucial if he wanted to dismantle the operation. But sitting on the sidelines felt unbearable, especially when so much was at stake. Lisa, too, faced challenges in the aftermath of the trial. The media frenzy surrounding the case brought her newfound fame, but it also made her a target. Anonymous threats began appearing in her inbox, accusing her of undermining law enforcement and siding with criminals. One email read, "You think you're a hero? Wait until the streets turn against you." Despite the intimidation, Lisa refused to back down. She held press conferences, speaking passionately about the need for accountability and transparency in policing. Her words resonated with many, earning her support from activists and community leaders alike. But privately, she worried about Marcus. She hadn't heard from him since the trial ended, and his absence gnawed at her. One evening, Lisa received a call from an unknown number. When she answered, Marcus's voice came through the line. "Lisa, it's me," he said quietly. "I'm safe. For now." "Where are you?" Lisa asked, her tone sharp with concern. "What's going on?" "I can't tell you everything," Marcus admitted. "But I need your help again. There's more to this story, and I think you're the only one who can make sure the truth comes out." Lisa hesitated, torn between curiosity and caution. "Marcus, You're asking me to trust you without giving me all the facts. How do I know I'm not putting myself in danger? You don't, Marcus replied honestly. But I wouldn't ask if I didn't believe in you. You've already done so much. Please, just meet me tomorrow morning. I'll explain as much as I can. After a long pause, Lisa agreed. Something in Marcus's voice convinced her that whatever he was involved in was bigger than either of them. And deep down, she couldn't walk away, not when there was still work to be done. The next day, Lisa met Marcus at a secluded park on the outskirts of Chicago. Dressed casually in jeans and a hoodie, Marcus looked less like a mechanic and more like someone trying to blend into the crowd. He greeted Lisa with a nod, his eyes scanning the area for any signs of trouble. "Thanks for coming," Marcus said, as they sat on a bench overlooking a small pond. "I know this isn't easy for you." "What exactly am I doing here, Marcus?" Lisa asked, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "You've dragged me into something huge and I still don't fully understand what's going on." Marcus sighed, running a hand over his face. "I work for the CIA," he admitted finally. "My mission was to infiltrate a human trafficking ring operating in this city. Angela was helping me gather evidence. When Keller and Hayes framed me, it wasn't random. They were following orders from someone high up in the organization." Lisa stared at him, stunned. "You're CIA? Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I couldn't risk compromising my cover," Marcus explained. "Even now, telling you this puts you in danger. But I need your help to expose the boss, the person pulling the strings. Without you, we won't be able to bring them down." Lisa processed his words, her mind racing. Everything suddenly made sense. Marcus's calm demeanor under pressure, his reluctance to share details, the depth of the conspiracy. Yet despite the risks, she found herself nodding slowly. "Okay," she said. "Tell me what you need." Over. The next hour, Marcus outlined his plan. Using the evidence they had gathered during the trial, along with new intel provided by the CIA, they would build a case strong enough to implicate not just Keller and Hayes, but the entire trafficking ring, including its leader. It was a dangerous game, one that required precision and timing. But Marcus believed they could succeed if they worked together. As they parted ways, Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that her life had changed forever. She had always fought for justice, but this was different. This wasn't just about winning a case. It was about taking down a monster. And for the first time, she realized that justice often came at a price, one she might have to pay alongside Marcus. In the days that followed, Marcus and Lisa worked tirelessly, piecing together clues and strategizing their next moves. The CIA provided resources and protection, but Marcus knew the final push would depend on their teamwork. Every step forward felt like walking a tightrope, with betrayal lurking on either side. Still, Marcus held on to hope. Angela's death had taught him that sacrifices mattered, that every action, no matter how small, contributed to the greater good. And as he prepared for the final showdown, he vowed to honor her memory by finishing what they had started. Justice might be slow, but Marcus believed it was worth fighting for. Together with Lisa, he was ready to take on the darkness even if it meant risking everything. The final stage of Marcus Johnson's mission was set in motion. With Lisa Carter by his side and the CIA backing him, he prepared to take down the human trafficking ring once and for all. The stakes were higher than ever, but Marcus felt a strange sense of calm. He had spent months living in the shadows, gathering evidence and risking his life to expose the truth. Now, it was time to step into the light. Lisa played a crucial role in this phase of the operation. Using her legal expertise, she helped compile the mountain of evidence they had gathered: surveillance footage, audio recordings, financial records, and testimonies from victims and whistleblowers. Together, they built a case that not only implicated Keller and Hayes but also traced their actions back to the mastermind behind the trafficking ring, a wealthy businessman named Victor Lang. Victor Lang was a well-respected figure in Chicago society. On the surface, he appeared to be a successful entrepreneur who donated generously to charities and attended high-profile events. But beneath his polished exterior lay a sinister reality. Lang used his influence and connections to run one of the largest human trafficking operations in the country. His network stretched across state lines, exploiting vulnerable individuals and laundering money through legitimate businesses. For years, he had operated with impunity, protected by layers of corruption and fear. Marcus knew that exposing Lang would be no easy feat. The man was careful, meticulous, and ruthless. Anyone who dared cross him disappeared without a trace. Angela Ruiz's death was proof of that. But Marcus refused to let fear dictate his actions. If anything, her sacrifice fueled his determination to see justice served. The plan unfolded over several weeks. Under the guidance of David Ross, Marcus and Lisa worked closely with federal agents to coordinate a sting operation. Their goal was to catch Lang red-handed, using wiretaps and undercover operatives to gather irrefutable proof of his crimes. It was a delicate process requiring precision and patience. One wrong move could alert Lang, giving him time to cover his tracks or flee the country. Meanwhile, protests continued to sweep through Chicago, demanding accountability for police misconduct and systemic corruption. The case against Keller and Hayes had sparked a citywide movement, with activists calling for reforms in law enforcement and greater transparency in government. Lisa became a prominent voice in these efforts, speaking at rallies and advocating for change. Her involvement brought attention to the broader issues at play, ensuring that the fight didn't end with Marcus's exoneration. As the investigation progressed, Marcus found himself reflecting on the journey that had led him here. He thought about the sacrifices he'd made, the lies he'd told, the relationships he'd strained, the nights he'd spent wondering if he'd survive another day. He thought about Angela, whose courage had cost her life, and Lisa, who had risked everything to stand by him. Most of all, he thought about the countless lives affected by the trafficking ring, lives torn apart by greed and cruelty. Despite the weight of it all, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to imagine a future beyond the mission, a future where he could live openly, free from the burden of secrets. But he knew that dream wouldn't come true unless Lang was stopped. The climax of the operation came on a cold, rainy night in late April. Federal agents armed with warrants and backed by overwhelming evidence raided Lang's headquarters, an unassuming office building downtown. Inside, they discovered files detailing every aspect of the trafficking operation: names of victims, locations of drop points, bank accounts used for money laundering, and even recordings of Lang issuing orders to his subordinates. Lang himself was arrested as he attempted to flee the scene. Dressed in an expensive suit and clutching a briefcase filled with cash, he looked every bit the arrogant tycoon he was. But when confronted with the evidence, his composure crumbled. He stammered and pleaded, claiming he had been misled by others in his organization. No one believed him. News of Lang's arrest spread quickly, dominating headlines across the nation. Protesters cheered, celebrating the downfall of a man who had long evaded justice. Politicians scrambled to distance themselves from him, while law enforcement agencies launched internal investigations to root out anyone complicit in his crimes. For Marcus, the victory was bittersweet. Lang's arrest marked the end of the trafficking ring, but it couldn't bring back those who had suffered or died because of it. Angela's absence weighed heavily on him, a constant reminder of the cost of his mission. Still, he took solace in knowing that her sacrifice hadn't been in vain. In the weeks that followed, Marcus began the difficult process of moving forward. His cover blown, he was reassigned to a new mission in another part of the country. Though he missed Chicago and the people he had grown close to, he embraced the opportunity to start fresh. Before leaving, he met with Lisa one last time. They sat together in a quiet cafe, sipping coffee as rain pattered against the windows. Neither spoke for a while, content to simply sit in silence. Finally, Marcus broke the quiet. "I wanted to thank you," he said softly, "for everything. I couldn't have done this without you." Lisa smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened with tears. You don't have to thank me. I just did what I thought was right. You did more than that, Marcus replied. You reminded me why we fight. For justice. For truth. For the people who can't fight for themselves. Lisa nodded, wiping away a tear. What happens now? For you, I mean. Marcus shrugged. I'll keep doing what I do. There's always another mission, another fight. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like there's hope. Maybe things can get better. They will, Lisa said firmly. Because of people like you. They shared a moment of understanding, two individuals bound by a shared commitment to justice despite their differences. As Marcus stood to leave, Lisa reached out and hugged him tightly. Be safe, she whispered. I will, Marcus promised. And so should you. Keep fighting. With that, Marcus walked out into the rain, disappearing into the crowd. Lisa watched him go, feeling a mix of pride and sadness. She knew she might never see him again, but she also knew his impact would stay with her forever. Back in Chicago, the ripple effects of the case continued to unfold. Keller and Hayes faced trial for their crimes, alongside others implicated in the trafficking ring. Activists pushed for sweeping reforms in policing and government oversight, ensuring that cases like Marcus's wouldn't happen again. Lisa remained at the forefront of these efforts, using her platform to advocate for marginalized communities. Though the scars of injustice ran deep, there was a newfound sense of possibility in the air. People talked about change, not as something distant or unattainable, but as something within reach. For Marcus, Lisa, and countless others, the fight wasn't over. But for the first time, it felt like they were winning.